The Marty and Laura Show is brought to you by Veterinary Village. With locations throughout Wisconsin, Veterinary Village is dedicated to enhancing the quality of animal and human lives today and into the future. Alrighty then. Welcome to the Marty and Laura Show, you guys. Welcome. I am Laura. I am joined by my friend.
I'm Marty Greer. Yes, I got it.
Yay! Marty and I have so much fun trying to get our lines right when we open the show, so join us in our hilarity. We're having our fun now because we have a pretty serious topic that we wanted to share with people. And this is, we're discussing what is commonly referred to as bloat, also known as GDV, gastric volvulus. I'm saying it wrong.
Gastric dilatation and volvulus, yes.
There we go. Dilatation. And so, see, this is why I do not get the big bucks. This is why, because I can't ever get the names right. But we know what it is. And bloat is a very, very serious situation. It is very common in certain breeds. It has no boundary as to male or female or intact or not intact or purebred or not purebred. Bloat is an awful, awful thing that can happen to your dog, and it is an emergency because it is very, very sudden.
Right. Sudden, life-threatening, very serious, and you have literally virtually no time to react. Minutes on a good day. Mm-hmm. So we'll go into some of the detail of this.
And I think we experience this in our community that Marty and I live in, because we have dogs of particular breeds, or you're in a veterinary setting where you see this. Did a lot of work in the emergency room. I have seen a whole lot of it because I am involved in my work as a dog handler with a lot of breeds in which bloat is a thing that happens. And if you show 100 dogs, eventually one of them is going to bloat, and usually more.
Right. And I think that's part of this, is that it is sheer volume. If I have clients with kennels of dogs. I have a group of dogs. So the more dogs you have, the more likely you are to see it, simply because the incidence is high. And if you have 10 dogs, you're 10 times as likely to see it as if you have one. And if you have 20 dogs, it's 20 times. So, the number of dogs doesn't increase the percentage of bloats, but it certainly increases the chances that you're going to have a dog that does have an episode of bloat, gastric dilatation and volvulus, GDV for short. It's one of the most feared things for both veterinary clinics and owners, because it takes you out at the knees, man, and you have to react fast. You have to know what you're doing, and
we're here to save your dog's life.
Exactly.
This is not an exaggeration. We are here to save your dog's life. What you hear today will save your dog's life.
Right. Because a lot of people don't identify what it is fast enough, and they don't recognize it for how serious it is. And so the symptoms typically are a dog that is non-productively trying to vomit and their abdomen is distending. Mm-hmm. And so it happens really quickly. And you may just look at the dog and go, well, he's just gacking up a little bit of foam. It's not that bad. I'm going to go to bed. And you get up in the morning and the dog is
gone,
deceased. So it's something you have to really take seriously.
I will say, having lived through it up close and personal, the only way that you slept through it is the dog sleeps in another building.
Oh yeah.
My own personal Akita was in my kennel building, which was a good chunk away from my house, and I was asleep and he woke me up. It is so incredibly painful. The screaming that the dog emits is real. But
not all dogs scream. Some of them will, but not all of them do. And some of them are so acutely sick that they simply don't. They simply can't. So I don't want to imply that screaming is going to be a telltale sign. It certainly can be, but it's it's not the only symptom, and it certainly can be a symptom, but it's not uniform enough that I would rely on that to be a
Fair,
diagnostic
fair,
tool.
fair, fair. Um, and the swelling of the abdomen, when you're talking about that, it's not just swelling. They literally look like they swallowed a basketball. And it
Mhm.
feels that, like, if you tap their stomach, it feels as if you're tapping a basketball, a fully inflated basketball.
Right. And if they don't have a lot of coat and you thump it, it echoes just like
Mhm,
a watermelon. So
mhm,
it's pretty distinctive when that happens. But again, it's not always. I remember seeing a German Shepherd that I left the state fairgrounds to drive back to see the dog, and I walked in the office, looked at her, and I said, "Oh yeah, it sounded like a bloat on the phone, but it doesn't look that bad." Put her on the X-ray table and went, yeah, it's that bad. And what had happened basically is she had a very long rib cage and the stomach was up underneath the rib cage, and it was hidden enough from her rib cage and her coat that it wasn't really evident just looking at her. So
mm,
typical symptoms are acute onset of abdominal pain, attempts to vomit non-productively. So if food is coming up, if lots of stuff is actually coming up, it's probably not a bloat.
right.
It's this non-productive vomiting, because what happens is that the stomach dilates with gas, and as it does that, it puts pressure on the esophagus and puts pressure on the intestines. And so they can't vomit anything up because it basically puts so much pressure on it. And then if it has gone from a gastric dilatation to a gastric dilatation and volvulus, volvulus means twist. So
Mhm.
it flips in the abdomen. And then it's like you took a tennis ball and put it in your sock and you spun it around, that it spins off the intestines and spins off the esophagus. So nothing literally can get through it. And so then the gas continues to build and build and build. The fluid continues to build, and then it just progressively gets bad. I've seen spleens tear off of the stomach. I've seen these dogs rupture their stomach. This this literally can happen within minutes. And if you don't identify it, and if you can't get into a veterinary clinic that can help you quickly enough, you're going to lose this dog. And that's just the reality. And we try to keep the Marty and Laura show a little bit more fun and lighthearted. But in this particular case, there's nothing lighthearted or fun
We
about this.
want you to we want you to save your dog, right? We
Yeah.
want your dog to live. So in this case, I agree. We can't be lighthearted. There isn't anything fun. As I said, I showed an enormous number of Akitas, and this is a breed in which bloat is not uncommon. And I had a friend of mine grooming her dog at my motorhome setup at the dog show. I walked away 5 minutes, 10 minutes to go inside the building to check on what was going on in a ring, and came back and she was gone. And in the amount of time, maximum 10 minutes, that I walked to the building and walked back, the dog had gone from perfectly fine on the grooming table, happy wagging its tail, to bloating and on the way to the vet.
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
fast.
Yeah. It is that fast. So that's really a good part of the problem. It typically is a large breed, deep chested dog, but not always. I've seen it in a beagle, I've seen it in a corgi, so it doesn't always have to be in a large breed, deep chested dog. It's often associated with eating a large meal and then sometimes excessive amounts of exercise shortly thereafter, but again, not always.
Mhm.
So there aren't any hard and fast rules about this. It's most common in the older dogs. They feel like as they get older, their ligaments and some of the things that all your stuff, kind of puts you together, gets a little bit looser and a little bit more likely. I mean, I can tell you, I don't look like I did when I was 20. So,
Sure.
gravity sucks. So let's face it, those things happen.
Reality
And so,
check.
yeah, the stomach is more likely to flip over in a dog that's older rather than younger. But I have seen this in a 4-month-old puppy. So I can tell you, you cannot across the board say it's always associated with a meal. It's always associated with a young dog or an old dog. It's always associated with a certain breed. Those rules are all meant to be broken. Boy, girl, doesn't matter. Exercise, no exercise, doesn't matter. All those things that you think are kind of hard and fast rules are guidelines, but they are not in stone. And your dog can do any of those things, and instantly you can be in that much trouble. So, if your
I
dog is retching non-productively, you need to call the closest emergency clinic, make sure they have capacity, get in the car, and go. And try not to run over old ladies on your way.
I will add, the deep narrow chest. It seems to be a physiological trait that they found in, and the sad part is there's been so much research done on this because it is such a devastating
Yes.
situation that happens. But it's all relatively inconclusive. Like Marty said, deep, narrow chest. I have, and again, this is entirely anecdotal, but I have consistently seen where a stressful situation
Mhm.
be a trigger, a dog that's anxious or stressed, and lots of kind of water gulping, anything that's going to put a lot of air in the system.
Mhm. Right. So, bottom line is, if you think you've got it going on, then you have to be careful. And all the research has not been able to produce an experimental model that allows this to be consistently studied. And so people say, well, don't exercise your dog within an hour of the time that they eat. And again, those things can be helpful, but they're not 100% preventive. The only thing we know that prevents it, with all the research, all the stuff that we've done, and this was a thing 44 years ago when I graduated from vet school, and we really are almost in the exact same place that we were then as far as understanding it, is that feeding 2 meals a day reduces the likelihood. And that is the only thing. Raising the dish, lowering the dish, the kind of food, whether you float the food or not float the
Water,
food, all
yeah,
those,
yeah.
none of those things have been shown to be consistent. The only thing I can tell you is if you feed your dog 2 meals a day, they are less likely to bloat, but I'm not going to tell you that that's a guarantee either.
It certainly isn't. I
Yep.
have for years. And those of us that have bloating breeds follow protocols, right? Like we do all the things, like we hedge all of our bets. And my feeding schedule is entirely based around no exercise before and after. I limit water intake at certain times of day, all of the things that we can do.
Doggett simplifies the puppy buying journey by connecting families with the perfect breed and responsible, health-verified breeders. They are the only breeder marketplace that verifies health clearances and responsible breeding practices. Through their personalized puppy matcher tool and matchmaker services, they educate and guide buyers every step of the way, ensuring a seamless process and a perfect match for their lifestyle. From initial breed consultation to introductions with top breeders, Doggett makes responsible puppy ownership easy and stress-free.
The important one that I would add that we haven't suggested or mentioned yet, if you have a dog that physiologically meets the specifications, deep, narrow chest, or is part of a breed that is known to have this as a feature.
Or even a line of dogs. We will see subsets of dogs. We will know that there are relatives of these dogs that have a tendency to do that.
100%. There is, and you can speak to this, the idea of prophylactically, right? Like in case of need, tacking the stomach to the body wall.
Correct.
So do you want to talk about that and pros,
Yes.
and if there are any cons, and who should do that and that sort of thing?
Sure. So it's a surgical procedure. It has to be done with anesthesia, full abdominal procedure. There are many different techniques to tack the stomach. So different surgeons have different opinions of what works the best. But essentially what we do is we take the stomach itself, not the abdomen, but the stomach. And you can do this at a neuter. It's really handy to do it at a spay because you're already in the abdomen. I've done it at other procedures as well. And you essentially suture it in one form or another. You suture it to the inside of the abdominal wall. And that way it will form a scar tissue. And then if the dog does fill with gas, the stomach is not going to flip 82% of the time. It's not 100%. So you can reduce the risk that the stomach's going to flip, but it doesn't keep the stomach from filling and still being gassy. So there are gassy bloats, there are food bloats, there are water bloats, there's all kinds of different bloats. And essentially tacking the stomach reduces the likelihood that it's going to flip. The downside to it is some dogs don't feel particularly good right after it because their stomach is stretched a little bit and in a weird position. Every now and then, because some of the sutures, depending on the procedure that's done, some of them may be non-absorbable, so they may lead to the possibility of a draining tract, and then the sutures might later have to be removed. Those kinds of things can certainly happen. Having gas X around in case there is a food bloat is a good idea, or a gassy bloat is a good idea, but that's not going to keep you from going to the emergency clinic. It's just going to buy you some time. If you have skills that are medically based, if you're an EMT, a nurse, medically based, if you're a veterinary professional, some of those things, then some of those clients will have the tools, the equipment that it takes to try to pass a stomach tube into the dog's stomach and relieve some of the gas. But again, that may not keep you out of the emergency clinic. It may just stabilize your dog long enough to get there. And literally, some of these dogs don't have the time to even get them loaded up and take off. So know where your close emergency clinic is. If you travel with your dog, you go on vacation, you have a cabin, you have a summer home, you have, you go to visit family, any of those things, look ahead so that you know where there's an emergency clinic, what their hours are, what they have capacity for. Because even if they're there, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're going to have enough staff and enough capacity to get you in the door and manage this, because this is all hands on deck when it happens. And part of what happens with this is the spleen gets tangled up in it, the stomach gets tangled up, it loses blood flow. You can
I was
start
just
to
gonna
have
say there's a thing that they don't get blood to the organs, right? Just because of the whole process.
right. It compresses the chest, so you have less lung capacity. They start to become uh, their system becomes acidic. You're not be able to breathe. The stomach gases start to build up. The acid starts to build up. The spleen can tear. Physiologically, this is just a disaster. The heart starts to beat irregularly because of all the toxins that are building up. I mean, there's just this whole cascade of these horrible things that can happen. The dogs can stop being able to clot their own blood so that they start to go into DIC. I mean, all these things can happen, and I've seen every single one of them as a possibility. I've seen spleens tear off the stomach wall. I've just seen if it can go wrong, it will, and it does with a bloat.
So talk us through, like, okay, I've recognized that my dog is in a bloat, and possibly a torsion, and I've gotten them to a veterinarian that can deal with it, and the veterinarian says this dog needs to stay here to stabilize it, and you're like, why? It's not, talk us through that, because to me, I think that is one of the least well understood things with the particular procedure is the follow-up.
So typically when you get to the emergency clinic, they're going to try to get an IV catheter in the dog, stabilize the dog, get an x-ray, and see if it looks like the stomach is just filled with gas, or if the stomach is filled with gas and flipped, or if there's another cause for the dog's abdomen to have filled with fluid. We can see splenic tumors that can bleed and the dog can fill with fluid. We can see cardiac problems and other kinds of cancer that can cause the abdomen to fill with fluid. We can see a lot of different reasons that the belly gets distended. Of course, there's pregnancy. If you maybe didn't notice that your dog got bred, there's a lot of reasons that dogs can have a distended abdomen, but typically it doesn't happen this acutely. It's not like you looked at them and then 15 minutes later you looked at them and they look different. So it tends to be pretty dramatic. We typically will get an x-ray, get the dog started on fluids, get them started on stabilization. They may need to be on oxygen. They may need to be on things to help their pH. There's a whole array of things. They may need pain medication. There's a whole array of things. And then you have to make a decision whether this dog is in the situation that it needs to go to surgery. If you have the option of stabilizing the dog and monitoring it to see if you can keep it from volvulus, keep the twist from happening, and so the dog can just be stabilized and observed carefully at the emergency clinic overnight until the next day, and see if they can just go to surgery for a regular stomach tack instead of an emergency one. Some of these dogs have a tube put into the stomach surgically. There's a whole array of different things that happen, but when you start talking about any of these procedures, you're talking about thousands of dollars that can happen pretty quickly. And I've seen them be $8, $10, $12, $14,000.
Very
So
good friend that just like this last week dropped $11,000
yeah.
for old Chow Chow.
Yeah, so this is why we have pet insurance. This is why you have care credit or scratch pay or vet billing or whatever source of additional support financially that you have. This is when you call everyone and ask if you can borrow $1,000. There's a lot of things that go on, and there's a lot of gnashing of teeth and wringing of hands, and this is a really dramatic and scary thing, because a lot of times when you go to the vet, we can give you, you can do x-rays, or we can treat conservatively, or we can send you home with medication. Sometimes you get plan A, plan B, plan C. This is, they grab you by the shirt collar and they shake you and they say, you got 10 seconds to make a decision or your dog's going to be history. And this is my line that I learned my first year out of vet school, is not to decide is to decide, because the longer you hem-haw around going there, and the longer you hem-haw
particularly with a bloat.
getting in the car and deciding, and then you get there and they like, well, you're third in line and I'm not sure if we have time. And then you're like, oh, I don't have any money. It's a disaster.
It really
So
is.
you
And
gotta be prepared for
again,
this.
we usually take on the light topics, but there are things that are so important that we have the information to share with you that it's worth taking a real hard cold look at life. And I'm not going to say if you have a Chihuahua you're safe. There's other things, but Irish Wolfhounds, Saint Bernards, Doberman Pinschers, Weimaraners, Irish Setters, German Wirehair Pointers, Akitas, Rhodesian Ridgebacks, Borzoi,
Standard poodle.
Standard Poodles. Yes, that was where I was going next, because for many people who have what we would think of as a doodle, a purpose-bred dog, if it's crossed with a poodle, I promise you it can still bloat.
Bernese Mountain Dogs, you name it. But like I said,
Let's
even
breed a Bernese Mountain Dog to a poodle. Yep, that can bloat.
That's asking for trouble. The Bernedoodles like to have those things happen. So if you live in a remote community or you are limited on finances, you may want to talk to your veterinarian about prophylactically tacking the stomach. It's a great time to do it at a spay. It's not quite as good for a neuter because you're in two different parts of the body when you do the procedure, but the dog's already under anesthesia. You've already paid for the anesthesia, the blood work, all the stuff, the pain meds, all the stuff. So you might as well talk about that. I have dogs that we routinely just prophylactically tack because we know they come from a line of dogs that have a tendency to do this. So, if you live remote and you're 3 hours from a vet clinic, you're not going to get there in time. No. It's just really important that you think this through and you talk to your veterinarian, you talk to your breeder, talk to the source of people that you got your dog from, because they're going to know if you have a dog that breed.
That's really important, because I'll just use the Akitas that I showed as an example. I showed lots of different Akitas for lots of different breeders. I had one breeder that I showed dogs for that, as far as I know, and I followed her line for a lot of years and showed a lot of her dogs, basically had maybe one dog bloat ever in the history of the breed, which is incredible. And I had another dog or a series of dogs from another breeder that was known to bloat. And I had been showing, this is such a horrible story. I was showing a dog for her, needed a major. I sent it home. She was going to bring it back to me at a specialty a couple of weeks later. The dog gets home and literally 12 hours later, he bloats, sets off the entire kennel. His mother bloats. She lost both of them in the same night.
Yeah. Yep. It's pretty horrible. And if your dog gets into anything, like I've had a dog that got into a whole bag of dog food.
Yep. That happened to my Akita.
At my daughter's house, she, didn't realize that the dog had access to it. The dog ate too much. Mm-hmm. So if those things happen, you need to contact your veterinarian for emergency care, because those are the things that you need to intervene on. Is that can be a food bloat. I had a 4-month-old puppy, Labrador puppy, that died of a food bloat. So and that was with treatment. It belonged to an employee who knew what was going on. We got immediate treatment. It didn't matter. This puppy died anyway. So these really horrible things can happen. So, you think you're prepared. You think you've got your act together. You think, oh, it's happening. And reality is it just can happen so quickly, and it's nobody's fault when this stuff happens. It's just the reality of what happens. So you have to be, as prepared for this as you can. And like I said, if you have a professional experience with medicine, you may want to have a stomach tube and a mouth gag and some other things.
Talk to your vet about that.
Yes, you need to have a veterinarian's input on how this happens. This is not a do-it-yourself at-home kit.
This is definitely not a DIY.
No, not even a little bit. No. So, just be as prepared as you can. Like I said, have your insurance, have your care credit, have all your stuff. And if it happens, it happens. I actually had a boxer many years ago, that was bloated. And I sent him down to the vet school, and they diddled around with this dog for 3 days. And remarkably, she did not die from her bloat, but they finally took her to surgery on the 3rd day. I'm like, what are you people doing? You're at the vet school. No. And, the owner,
I would have lost my mind. There would have been a bad scene.
Totally. The owner was prepared to go to surgery. She had stopped at home and gotten a suitcase full of money because she knew that cash was going to get her in the door. And it still took them 3 days to take her to surgery. And remarkably, the dog survived. So, there's just so many scenarios. I've seen so many of these in different places, different ways that this happens. the one bloat that really stands out in my mind was a Gordon setter, and he came in the middle of the night. I was working at the emergency clinic. My husband was down there. He wasn't working at the emergency clinic because he was doing large animal, but he was kind of hanging around. Dog came in with a bloat, took him to surgery. Woke him up, got him off the table, and I looked around and I said, like, where's Dan? I don't understand where he went. And so I went to check on him, and he's like, I wasn't feeling too good, so I just laid down. Yeah, he had appendicitis. So we ended up, I ended up going from the dog bloating to taking my husband to the emergency room.
For
And
an appendix out. Oh my
yeah,
God.
and the doc says, well, what has he had to eat today? And I said, let's see, a couple crackers and a glass of lemonade. And he's like, what is wrong with you people? It's 4:00 in the afternoon. I'm like, well, you don't understand my schedule. Like, I was up all night, and never mind. So at 8:00 at night, he had his appendix out. So, there's just these, when it happens, an acute abdomen is an acute abdomen. It's as acute, if not more acute, than appendicitis. It's painful, but there's really no comparable disease in a human
No.
that I
Is
can use
it,
to.
I don't know enough about the systems of colic. I mean, I know what colic is in a horse. Is it a similar concept or no?
It's similar, but it's a completely different organ. A colic is typically the intestines or the cecum. That horses, this is the stomach.
Right.
Horses have a monogastric stomach
Right.
as
They've
well
got
as
a different
dogs and
thing.
humans,
But if
yeah,
you're familiar
anatomically,
with a colicked horse, I mean, there's a lot of that same kind of pain, and I mean,
emergency.
yeah,
It's that much of an
emergency. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolute
So
emergency.
appendicitis, colic, and bloat, I guess they're all acute abdomens. They're all different organs, but it kind of gives you a flavor of how painful and how acute these are, and how significant immediate surgical intervention is in life-saving these, this kind of experience. Because people used to die of appendicitis. It's only been 60
on the
years.
Lewis and Clark Trail. Can I tell you a story? On the
Sure.
Lewis and Clark Trail, the only one of the original crew that actually died of the Lewis and Clark and the Discovery team, there was one person that died, and he died around Sioux City, and they believe it was from an appendicitis.
Yeah.
There you
So
go. My
it's in the same
weird factoid for the day.
Yes. But the appendix is different. That's a little part of a cecum.
Yeah.
So it's more like a horse colic than it is a
Right.
dog bloat. But it
Right.
still gives you an idea of how acute and how serious and how painful and how all of this happens. So if you've ever had appendicitis, you've ever had any of those things happen, or you've had horses, it gives you an idea of the severity and the acute nature of this. So bottom line is, if you think your dog is bloating, just go. Call the emergency clinic, call your regular vet.
They don't charge you to just be there. They only charge you if they take the dog to be examined.
But, take the dog in, have the x-ray taken, and if they say, gosh, everything is fine, you can go home, great. So you spent a couple $100, but you saved your dog. So bottom line is, just don't mess around with these. I don't know how many other ways to say it other than just take it seriously.
This isn't our longest podcast, but it might be our most serious. There
most life-saving, yes.
Yeah, it is definitely an important topic, and like I said, I had a friend that just went through it. She knew what it was, and it still cost her $11,000. It's like, you need to remind people. I said, okay, I can do that.
Yep, for sure.
Because it is such a tough disease.
So have your GasX available, have your emergency phone numbers ready, have your credit card ready, and just, be prepared. And hopefully it never happens to you. God help you that it does, because it's a mess. But that's the best advice I can give you is feed your dog twice a day and have care credit.
And have GasX. I'm telling you, GasX is a godsend. So, all right, everybody. Thank you so much. Appreciate you joining us. We'll catch you again next week. Have a great night, Marty.
Good night.
Thank you for joining us on the Marty and Laura Show. We're excited to bring you these unique, fun, fact-based conversations about pet health. We hope you'll join us on social. Stop by the website to sign up for an extra tip of the week for your pet. While you're at it, do us a favor, please, and leave a review wherever you find your podcasts. The Marty and Laura Show is produced by Pure Dog Talk, Inc., Sound design and editing by Premium Audio Services.